Now broadcast in NICAM digital stereo, The Trouble with Agatha Christie.
Tonight, in this studio, we have several mysteries to solve. How does this man know so much about death by poisoning? Why has this man made a fortune from crime and never been arrested? Why is this man wanted in Japan? And what makes you think this woman is Agatha Christie? Good evening. Tonight we're looking at the phenomenon of Agatha Christie. The unchallenged queen of crime, she's made more money out of murder than any woman since Lucretia Borgia. Sales of her books run into hundreds of millions. She's been translated into 63 languages. Her play, The Mousetrap, has broken every theatrical record in the world and in November enters its 40th year. Nearly 20 years after her death, sales are still increasing. Film and TV adaptations of her work are more popular now than when she was alive. 4 new Christie films are to be made this year, and her most famous character, Hercule Poirot, is seen on television around the world. So, what is this woman's hold over us, and why do so many of us feel we can't set out on a journey without packing a Christie? Tonight I'm joined by Agatha's family and friends, along with crime writers, policemen and pathologists, and stars of her stage and screen work. Agatha always set her readers a mystery to solve, and ours tonight is to explain how such a shy, retiring woman became a household name from Sidcup to Shanghai. But at the beginning of the program, I accused this gentleman of making money out of crime. Now, Matthew Pritchard, would you care to defend yourself?
You want me to reveal myself?
Please.
Agatha Christie was my grandmother, and we grew up together, obviously, as she was my grandmother, and to me, she wasn't the famous person you've just described. She was the most lovable and ordinary grandmother who read me stories in the morning and was nice to my friends and was an occasional shoulder to cry on.
She's obviously been very much an influence in your life. How do you feel when you see her on the screen?
Nostalgic, and I suppose a little bit sad. I mean, we all miss her dreadfully. I was very lucky. I had 2 wonderful grandmothers, and I miss them both very much. And I think it's not so much seeing her, which I suppose we all do quite often on the back of books and things, but the voice gets to me.
So you were obviously very close. What do you think she would have thought of something like this?
Well, she wouldn't have been here, I can tell you. And she might have found it difficult to watch it because she never actually owned a television, although she used to sneak into the back room where her housekeeper had a rather small black and white set. And she might be there tonight, but not here, I think.
Was there ever a particular moment when you became aware of her skills?
Well, there were odd moments. Mostly she was just an ordinary family person, but I remember going to a dinner dance with her once, and after dinner, the whole table got up to have a dance, and we were looking back at the table, and she said, look, she said, there are 12 glasses sitting around an empty table. How easy it would be just to change over 2 of those glasses, and there you have the makings of a plot, poison in one and not in the other. And I see you have a picture of the book. It's called Sparkling Cyanide in England, but that's the American title, and that was the book that maybe resulted from that one little instance.
And only you and she would have known. What do you think is the secret of her success?
I think it's that the books are jolly good fun, and I think that something of her own huge enthusiasm for life comes through in the books, and that they're ordinary, nothing educational, nothing difficult, just plain, simple entertainment.
Thank you, Matthew, very much. So you see, a good yarn and plenty of suspense is perhaps the simplest way of explaining her appeal. The golden rule being that the reader should never turn straight to the last page.
Come on. Tell me, who done it then? It's coming on the last page, I told you that. Here we are. So, Inspector, you can see the only person who could have done all these murders is the man sitting over there. So saying, Johnny Oxford pointed his finger at, men, are you skinny? Do you have sand kicked in your face? That's not right. There's a page missing. The last page is missing. Where's the last page? What have you done with the last page? I haven't touched the last page. Well, where is it? It's gone. The solution's on the last page. Oh, this is ridiculous. Here am I, a bag of tensed-up nerves, waiting to see who did it, and this happens. It's enough to send a man round a twist.
Talking of going round the twist, Dr. Anthony Clare is Professor of Clinical Psychiatry at Trinity College, Dublin. Having been a keen Christie reader all his life, we've asked him to do a bit of analysis on himself and all Dame Agatha's fans.
The trouble with Agatha Christie is that the woman whose books outsold everything save the Bible created a series of characters who are about as psychologically interesting as the Muppets. Her astonishing success derives from her ability to promise terror, deviance, violence, and deliver bland reassurance. Acclaimed as the Queen of Crime, her theories on crime and punishment have all the subtlety and sophistication of the average attender at a Conservative Party law and order debate. Murder she wrote indeed, but it is a sanitized murder. She had a genuine distaste for blood and guts, an indifference to the fact that many crimes are never solved, and a sturdy belief in the perfection of the English judicial system. Her middle-class values are supreme. Hers is a world of country houses and vicarages where people sit down to lavish English breakfasts of omelettes and devil kidneys, and where foreigners, like Poirot, are more than a little eccentric. When Agatha Christie herself was brought face to face with an unpleasant personal reality, the discovery that her first husband, the dangerously handsome Archibald Christie, was having an affair with a lady called Nancy Neal, she somewhat characteristically recoiled from this whiff of pungent, messy, complicated living and mysteriously disappeared. The explanation favored by those close to Agatha was that under the strain she cracked and developed amnesia. Another way perhaps of saying that faced with reality, she blotted it out. In this way, the mysterious affair at Harrogate was perfectly in line with all her novels, beginning with the mysterious affair at Styles, in which the blotting out of reality and the construction of a cozy, even amiable fairy tale world is what she is about. For in a very real sense, a Christie thriller is a sort of adult fairy tale, in which skin-deep characters are not what they appear. Good trembles before evil, momentarily goes under, and then by a brilliant trick, triumphantly resurfaces. And, like the fairy story, the ends are all neatly tied, all the suspects gathered together in an obedient circle, while Poirot or Miss Marple dispense heaven to the good and hell to the bad in a transparent imitation of the Day of Judgment. In reaching for our Christie, we are reaching for a drug that titillates but ultimately tranquilizes, a flirtation with the dark underside of life before returning to the bosom of stability. The less complex the character, the better, she found. Readers can cope with complexity of plot, however, and this she liberally doled out. It has been said that the fantasy which the detective story addict indulges in is the fantasy of being restored to the Garden of Eden. Agatha packaged this fantasy of the fall, the resurrection, and the omnipotent, all-seeing detective. The result has an appeal, equaled only by the book in which the Garden of Eden fantasy made its first enthralling appearance, the Bible itself.
Thank you, Doctor, very much. Matthew, would you say that was a fair assessment?
Well, I'm sure my grandmother would have been deeply flattered by what she heard from the good Dr. Clare, but I don't think she would have understood that as a sort of method of writing books. I think she just tried to entertain us. I remember some years ago reading an article, a learned article on the Beatles' music written by the Times music critic William Mann. And I believe Paul McCartney, when he read it, said, "I thought I just wrote tunes." And I rather feel like that about Agatha Christie's books. I think she wrote to entertain us, and although I thought a lot of what Dr. Clare said is very true, I don't think it occurred to her.
Michael?
Hello.
I'm Kate Parkin. I'm the editorial director at HarperCollins, responsible for Agatha Christie. And I'd just like to make a point following up on Anthony Clare. By the mid-1980s, we'd found that our Agatha Christie sales had been slowing down, and we were very concerned about this and commissioned a market research company to find out why. And what in fact they found out, the mystery of the declining sales, had absolutely nothing to do with the author herself, but was due to the sort of jackets that we were putting on the books. They were at that time very gory, full of blood, and were putting off readers who expect, I think, the sort of sanitized murder that Anthony Clare was referring to. And so what we did was change the jackets completely to the ones that we're using now. And we found within the first year that our sales had gone up 40% and more.
So the fans knew what they wanted, all right.
Absolutely, yes.
Lady Antonia Fraser, I know that you wanted to say something about this, didn't you?
Yes, I would like to pick up what Anthony Clare said and turn it on its head. I don't think those characters are cardboard at all. I don't think they're stereotypes. I think they're archetypes. Like if you think of it, the astrological signs produce sort of archetypes of human character. I think she's brilliantly clever, and I can quite believe she didn't mean to do it, but who knows with artists, really, what they mean to do or what they don't mean to do. But I think she produces these archetypes. You have the handsome young man who's a lure, really, who's underneath is very, very ruthless, which teaches you don't trust sort of beauty, whether masculine or feminine. She even has the evil child, which goes through fairy stories, often very sanitized in this country, but if you look at Grimm, there are evil children. There's one book, which I better not give the title because everybody must be allowed to read them in their own time. I won't give away the end, but there's a brilliant one where the child is actually the murderer, and so forth. So I think that her use of archetypes, I quite accept that it comes out of her unconscious, but I think it's one of the things, quite apart from the plot, which draws us to Agatha Christie.
Why is it, do you think, that so many respectable middle-class women do turn to writing crime, apart from present company? There's P.D. James and Ruth Rendell.
What makes you think we're so respectable?
Just from where I'm sitting, it looks very...
I think I've just been saying appearances can be deceptive. But actually, I once went to attended a sort of dialogue between P.D. James and Ruth Rendell, and I was looking at them. I was in the audience, like here, and I was looking at these two charming, good-looking and, yes, respectable-looking women. And I was thinking, yes, but behind your delightful faces and your charming personalities, somewhere there lurks these things which, in their case, are not repressed. They've put it all into their books. So I think, actually, I do agree with you.
Thank you. Dr. Clare, that get a response from you?
Well, I'm interested in Lady Antonia's point about the archetype. I think the problem, though, is that I think the average reader in coming to Christie isn't coming for the characterization or to empathize with the heroism or the struggle. I think it's the complexity of plot and the startling denouement. And in that sense, I think they're more in the nature of puzzles than psychological thrillers. And that's, it's not necessarily a criticism. It depends what you come to Christie for.
Right. Now, Agatha Christie shortened a lot of fictional lives. Let's talk about how she affected one or two flesh and blood characters. Now, John Wells, she certainly changed your life, didn't she?
Yeah, I think I'd probably still be a schoolmaster if it hadn't been for Agatha Christie. Because this was a sort of startling denouement the psychiatrist was just talking about. One minute I was a schoolmaster at Eton, the next minute I was being approached to write the musical version of Hickory Dickory Dock with a very strange foreign composer called Alexis Weissenberg. If he's watching now, I don't mean strange in any mysterious way, but the fact he was exotic. And I was therefore had a fantastic sudden moment of meeting Agatha Christie, which I'd always wanted to do. And I remember being tremendously impressed when I went down to Greenway, and Max Malin said, "Would you like some tea, Agatha?" And she said, "I think I'd like some freshly squeezed limes." And I thought, my goodness me, if we could only write, we might all do very, very well.
Did you get any insight into her working methods?
Well, it was very interesting. She was incredible. I was quite young at the time. She was very kind and wrote to me suggestions for dialogue for the scenes. And the thing I remember most clearly was that I got stuck on a clue problem about a student who was, I think, in a very progressive way, smuggling drugs in the back of his rucksack. And I said it was going to be difficult to do that on stage. And so I shouldn't worry about that. I've got a drawer full of clues upstairs. And she had a sort of chest of drawers, perhaps Matthew will confirm this, with ideas for clues that had occurred to her. And it shows it just shows the way she worked in a very professional way as a kind of builder of stories.
They weren't all different colours, were they? For different...
I didn't have a chance to peek into her chest of drawers, no.
One of the boys I know that you got away from by leaving Eton was, in fact, Matthew Pritchard.
Yeah.
I don't know who got away from whom.
Anyway, but fair, put it that way. Now, as we know, Agatha was a shy and reclusive person, but this hasn't stopped people getting a highly romantic notion of how a crime writer lives. Jessica Fletcher of Murder, She Wrote comes close to their ideal. Now, Angela Lansbury, when audiences see Murder, She Wrote, do they think they're watching an Agatha Christie?
Yes, I think some of them do. In fact, I think in some countries they call it Agatha Christie. Isn't that interesting?
And who do they think you are?
Agatha. They do. They think that, you see, Agatha Christie wrote the mystery stories, so they assume that Jessica Fletcher is really Agatha Christie.
And just to confuse us further, you actually have appeared in several Agatha films. You even played Miss Marple in The Mirror Cracked.
The poison was apparently an American barbiturate, marketed under the name of Calmadon. It appears the principal ingredient of it is,
Phenylethyl urea. I know it well from my days at Bridgehampton Hospital during the war. Mixed with alcohol, it causes respiratory depression, a drop in blood pressure, feeble heartbeat. Quite deadly, in fact.
And you naturally knew the victim, Babcock.
Oh, yes, of course. She was a simple soul, friendly enough. Bit of a bore, but you don't kill someone for that. If you did, there'd be no one left in the village.
Angela, do you agree with those actors who say that Agatha is a nightmare?
Yes. Yes, I do. You really have to build the character out of whole cloth because it's not immediately evident as, you know, who these people really are and what their characteristics are. Except for, I think that Poirot is the exception. He is described in such detail. But Miss Marple is described too. She's described, but really that's all. I had an interesting time doing research on her.
Did you find Miss Marple a difficult role to play then?
Yes, very. I found it difficult because I decided that Miss Marple was really patterned after Agatha Christie's aunt. And I read with tremendous interest about her early years, and the way her aunt conducted herself was obviously fascinating to Agatha. And I think that's who Miss Marple was.
Thank you. In a moment, we'll discover how Agatha Christie's stories were represented on film and what she thought of that. But here now is a fine example of a small-screen whodunit, or didn't.
Well, I must dash, or I'll be late for the 10:15.
I suggest you murdered your father for his seat reservation.
I may have had the motive, Inspector, but I could not have done it. For I've only just arrived from Gillingham on the 8:13, and here's my restaurant car ticket to prove it.
But the 8:13 from Gillingham doesn't have a restaurant car.
It's a standing buffet only. Did I say the 8:13? I meant the 7:58 stopping train.
But the 7:58 stopping train arrived at Swindon at 8:19, owing to annual point maintenance at Withborough Junction.
So how did you make the connection with the 8:13, which left 6 minutes earlier? Simple. I caught the 7:16 football special, arriving at Swindon at 8:09.
The 7:16 football special only stops at Swindon on alternate Saturdays.
Yes, sure. I'm on the holiday maker.
Indeed.
John Ed, or virtue, but I said she some addiction was request hope away. Somebody got screen. The man, of course, being Mr. now Sir Peter Ustinov, who joins us from a studio near his latest film location. So, Peter, are you receiving me all right?
Yes, Michael, I can hear you. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Can I ask, Sir Peter, if you'd read any of the Poirot novels before you took on the role?
Not an entire novel. I dipped here and there. But I saw right at the beginning that he was small, dapper, and bald. And I thought, well, they'll have to lump my not being able to do those things for him. And admittedly, when I first did it, Agatha Christie's daughter, Mrs. Hicks, looked at me and said, "You're not Poirot?" Very energetic she was. I said, "I am not." The only way to defend myself was to attack slightly. And it was really in character, that, too. I went on doing that.
Yes, many times. But you've written a number of books yourself. How would you appraise Agatha's writing? Are you a fan?
It's not, quite frankly, my cup of tea, because it has too little depth or perception to it, although you suddenly get perceptions which are quite alarmingly good and penetrating. So she's full of surprises. She always holds quite a bit in reserve, but it's all perhaps a little bald for me, and the characters are a bit stereotyped. The majors always have moustaches and speak like majors, and the clergymen also, and the butlers especially are exactly like that.
Yeah, I'm very sorry. We're obviously losing that link. We shall try to get back to Sir Peter later on. Thanks anyway so far. Right, what is next? Well, as we're on the subject of films, let's find out what Agatha Christie herself thought of what the cinema did to her creations.
Everything I have seen which has been done for the cinema, I have disliked intensely. Only one that I really enjoyed, and that was Witness for the Prosecution.
Yes, Witness for the Prosecution was certainly one of my favourites, the Billy Wilder version anyway. It had several Oscar nominations. Here, Marlene Dietrich is cross-examined by Charles Lawton.
And subsequently in arranging the marriage, you lied to the authorities?
I did not tell the truth to the authorities.
You lied to them?
Yes.
And in the ceremony of marriage itself, when you swore to love and to honor and to cherish your husband, that too was a lie?
Yes.
And when the police questioned you about this wretched man who believes himself married and loved, you told them?
I told them what Lynette wanted me to say.
You told them that he was at home with you at 25 minutes past 9, and now you say that that was a lie.
Yes, a lie.
And when you said that he had accidentally cut his wrist, again you lied.
Yes.
And now today you've told us a new story entirely. The question is, Frau Helm, were you lying then? Are you lying now? Or are you not, in fact, a chronic and habitual liar?
Several people in court had heart attacks then. It was a strong story, but oddly enough, Agatha had to be persuaded that it would make a good drama. Now, Sir Peter Saunders, you knew it would work.
Well, I thought it would. I had done 2 of Agatha's plays, and I'd read this short story, Witness for the Prosecution, and I badgered her for a year, and she said, it won't make a play, it belongs on the printed page. And eventually, slightly tetchily, she said, well, if you think it'll make a play, go and write it yourself. Well, I did write it. I took it to her. She read it, and she said, I see what you mean. It's not as I would have written it, but I will now write your play for you. 6 weeks later, the play arrived, and I think it was the greatest play of its kind that's ever been written.
Thank you. Now, surprisingly, Mrs. Christie was none too pleased with Miss Marple, as portrayed by that fine character actress, Margaret Rutherford. There was a little too much all-action heroine for the author's taste.
Wait. I took the liberty of borrowing this from Mr. Summer.
You don't think you can fool me with a prop gun filled with blanks?
Oh, no, not blanks. A friend of mine procured me some insurance.
I'll risk it.
I should warn you, I won the Ladies' Small Arms Championship at Bisley in 1924. Put it up.
Margaret Rutherford giving the twist the elbow. Now, Lord Braben, you had the difficult task of persuading Agatha that not all filmmakers were intent on destroying her work.
Yes, well, when Richard Goodwin and I first thought of making a film by Agatha Christie, we chose Murder of the Orient Express. And I rang up Edward Cork, who had been her agent for many, many years, a wonderful character, absolutely splendid man. And he said, you're absolutely wasting our time. You know, she doesn't want any more films made. But we didn't give up that easily, and we just went on pestering him, and I wrote to her, and eventually he said, well, look, I think it must have been after about 2 years. He said, or anyway, 18 months, 2 years. And he said, well, look, you better ask her to lunch. She feels she'd like to have a talk about it. So I asked her to come and have lunch, and we talked about various things, and I discovered that she really had very much liked the film Tales of Beatrix Potter, which Richard and I had made a few years before. And it really, that played quite a big part with her. And she said, well, you seem very determined to do this, so maybe you better have a go. And I'm glad to say she eventually came with her husband to see the film when it was made at a private showing, and she gave her approval, which was a great relief to Richard and me. And then also, which I think was really one of the most remarkable things, was she came for the premiere, which I think she'd never done before. And that really was I think, set the seal on it. She really quite liked the film.
Well, that proved her confidence, and of course it was one of the greatest successes of all the films. Now, Countess Mountbatten, your father is reputed to have come up with a very clever twist for one of her best stories.
Yes, that's quite true. He was a great enthusiast for detective stories, and when he was still a very young man, I think in 23, in the early 1924, he wrote to Agatha Christie suggesting that it would be an interesting twist if it was the narrator who turned out to have committed the murder, and that the suspicions would perhaps fall on the detective. And she acted on this, and the result was, in fact, the murder of Roger Ackroyd. And years later, they met for the first time at the premiere of my husband's film, Murder on the Orient Express, and talked about this. They had corresponded before that. He'd written to her, and she'd written back and said she was very pleased to hear from him, because she was very worried in the many years before that she mightn't have answered his letter. She mightn't have posted the letter. Luckily she had. And she sent him a copy of the book inscribed, recording the fact that it was his idea that started her off on the murder of Roger Ackroyd.
Lovely story, thank you. Now, Christie fans who love to know what they're getting will have relished the film versions of her book 10 Little Niggers, known in America as And Then There Were None, and changed in Britain to 10 Little Indians. Spread over 30 years, these films all have identical scenes. This is the 1945 version with Misha Auer.
One little Indian boy left all alone. So he went and hanged himself, and then there were none.
In 1965, when the Beatles were rocking the world, the director picked Fabian as his warbler.
So he went out and hanged himself, and then there were none.
In 74, Misha and Fabe became the mean, moody and minute Charles Aznavour.
And then there were none.
And they all get what's coming to them from the poison chalice.
Good night.
Death by tripping over the carpet. Yeah, Paul Fabian was best there, certainly. We have now re-established contact with Sir Peter Ustinov. So, can you hear me, Peter?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. Now, if we can pick up where we left off, can I ask you if you actually liked Poirot as a character?
I don't know whether I like him or not, because in fleshing him out, which I mean that literally, I thought the original concept was a little bit conventional, if I may say so, that...
he is rather an oddball, don't you think?
Yes, well, I think he gets his kick lip reading at extreme range. There again, I'm not at all like him, because I required something a little bit more substantial in my life. But he's obviously a born bachelor. He's very finicky in his ways, and the moustache cup, and he always wants wine served at all sorts of meticulous temperatures. I think those people, in a sense, price themselves out of the market, not really financially, but they're not satisfied with anything eventually, because nothing is exactly right ever in life. And so they spend their whole lives slightly on edge, waiting for perfection which never turns up.
David Suchet was once your Inspector Japp. Do you have any observations on his Poirot?
No, not really. I mean, I only seen one of them, and it's probably, it would not raise the hackles of Mrs. Hicks. He is, in fact, I hope he doesn't mind my saying so, slightly bald. He is lissome, he's lithe, and he's more meticulous Poirot than I ever could be, because I'm big and slightly negligent. So all things.
Yeah, I'm slightly vanishing again, I'm afraid. Very sorry. We'll try again a bit later on. Troubles with the link. We do, in fact, have a moment from 13 at dinner when the big and slightly negligent Ustinov Poirot comes face to face with the lithe and lissome Japp of David Suchet.
Oh, Japp, what brings you out so early?
Early? I've been up for hours on business. Murder.
And who, pray, has been murdered?
Lord Edgware. Stabbed to death last night by his wife.
To death by Lady Edgware?
She's Jane Wilkinson, the American actress.
What makes you think she did it?
Think? I know. She arrived last night around 10 in a blinking cab, announced herself to the butler like she was dropping in for tea, and this morning, there was his lordship with a neat little hole straight through the cistern into the mandala.
Well, in our audience tonight, we have the latest Poirot, nay Japp, David Suchet. David, would you like to come and join me? David, I think the best thing is just to go to a break for the moment.
I'll come with you.
Good afternoon, Monsieur Potter.
Good afternoon, Dr. Whitney.
Good afternoon, Monsieur.
I see you have joined the cavalry, huh?
Yes, I'm on my way home. It's the second time I've been killed in a month. I say, do you fancy a pint of beer, if there's any left?
No, merci. I cannot yet bring myself to enjoy the English public house. All those bottles of the different size, all in the wrong order.
Doesn't seem to bother your compatriots.
What is the use? I try to instill in them a sense of order and method. Always they disappear into the public house.
David Suchet as Poirot, and you'll be relieved to know that he's alive and well. David, I mean, what can I say?
I don't know, I was very frightened.
Not too badly shaken.
No, no.
It's just as well I called you up when I did, really.
Well,
now, we saw you as Japp earlier, and that's a real contrast to your Poirot, isn't it?
well, yes, Poirot, I eventually found out what I wanted to do with it. Japp I never did, so I ate all the time. Which is absolutely true. I didn't know how to approach Japp, and every single scene, I think, bar one, in the film, I managed to find some food to dive into and speak. Unlike Philip Jackson in our series, who knows exactly what to do.
Well, you've obviously worked very hard at the Poirot because it's absolutely perfect. What was your approach?
Well, I have to admit to being rather frightened at first when I was offered the role because of all the famous interpretations that have been played. And I realized that as a classical actor for so many years, I had really been doing many repeats of performances played by famous actors anyway. So I did the traditional thing. I went back to the text and I read her works. I won't say all her works, but the works of Poirot, and read enough to fill a nice fat notebook of the character. Because what I wanted to do was not try and imitate or try and compete with any other performance. What I decided to do was to approach it just as though it came through the letterbox for the first time. And here's the character, there's the author, what did she write? And I hope, and it was my aim to present the character that she wrote and hopefully would have been pleased with.
Well, we don't know what she thought, but most other people think it's tremendous. And it's worked all over the world because it's shown in over 40 countries. And here are just a few variations on the theme from Japan, Turkey, Spain, and Germany. See if you can spot which is which. The first one is quite easy.
If Monsieur Poirot has any suspicions, I should like all my belongings searched.
No, Monsieur Carlyle. I cast not the aspersions. It is a small problem merely. But a problem that will agitate the little grey cells
las pequeñas células grises.
Die kleinen grauen Zellen. Adequately.
I loved the Turkish one, didn't you?
Oh, dear.
Yeah. What has been, talking about worldwide awareness of what you've been up to, what's the most surprising reaction?
Well, I think it's just worldwide popularity. I never had any idea that it would ever be so popular. And I get letters from literally all over the world. I can't read most of them because they're all in the language, and I get Chinese, Japanese, and everything. But surprisingly enough, there are letters from majority of ladies.
And Poirot is a confirmed bachelor.
Yes, absolutely a confirmed bachelor. He respects women. He likes women. We know that he was in love once with the Countess Rosikoff. He actually says in the story of the Third Floor Flat, I wish I had got married, and he admits to being very fond of an English girl because she made him fluffy omelettes. When asked by Hastings, have you ever thought about it, Poirot? And Poirot says, what, mon ami? He says, about marriage. He says, but I am not of an ardent temperament, Hastings. And in my experience, I have known 5 cases of women murdered by their devoted husbands, but 22 cases of men murdered by their devoted wives. So no, thank you, it is not for me. So, no, he is a absolutely confirmed bachelor. And no way could he had any physical relationship with anybody, because he wouldn't have betrayed his one thing of beauty, which was his moustache.
Now, we've talked about Ustinov and Finney, but you three are not the only actors who tackled Poirot. Now, here are some others who brought their own very personal interpretation to the character. This first one seems to be straight out of a lower low.
Regarding that letter Lady Edgware never received, there are 4 solutions to that problem. The first, that it was lost in the post. The second, that Lady Edgware was lying when she said she never received it. But I cannot see that that would be to her advantage. The third, Lord Edgware was lying. He never sent it. But I cannot see the point of such a lie. The fourth, someone suppressed that letter. Someone who did not want that marriage dissolved. Hastings, I would give a great deal to know what is behind this affair.
Yes, and I'd give a great deal for one of those cigarettes you're messing about.
No. Don't try to sneak up on Poirot, my friend. It could be dangerous. Though I know that normally, wherever Poirot goes, there is intrigue, excitement, murder. But not here, not today, not in London. No, I'm here actually simply to see my tailor. Now, if you'd been with me last week in Istanbul, well, but there we are. I'm sorry. Again? Over. Please, do not follow Poirot. This is London. Nothing is going to happen. Goodbye.
Lady Agatha's party was destined to end in tragedy, for one of the guests was already planning a murder so grisly, so diabolical, that... What is the matter, Mr. Bultitude? Is something worrying you? Worrying me? Good heavens, no. Whatever made you think that? Even as the guests were playing croquet on the lawn, the murderer had crept silently into the kitchen and laced the orange juice with cyanide.
Yes, Austin Trevor was the original, and Tony Randall you saw there, and I don't need to tell you who the last one was. Now, Agatha Christie came to dislike Poirot so much that she wanted to kill him off. Do you sympathise with that, David?
Well, no, I don't. I can see why she wanted to kill him off. But I actually like the character, and I admire his love of life. I admire his twinkling attitude to life and people and his wry sense of humour. I think he's a lovely character to be.
Now, he does give the police a difficult time, although Japp quite admires him.
Yes, I think they have a tremendous healthy disrespect of each other. I think one of the most important things in creating Jap that she did was that she didn't create just a constable. She never says it's Constable Jap or Plodding Jap. He is a chief inspector. And I think that the more people that she manages to surround Poirot with who are not just fools and not just stereotypes, the greater Poirot's intelligence will appear. I think that's a very important part of her creation of the supreme brain inside this little man.
Might I make a point, David? Graham Ison, formerly a Detective Chief Superintendent at Scotland Yard, but now a crime writer. I have to say that even in the 1920s and 1930s, the prospect of an itinerant French-speaking Belgian interfering in the investigations of Scotland Yard would not be treated with a great deal of tolerance. In fact, I think the probable result would be that Monsieur Poirot would have been arrested for obstructing the police in the execution. Quite probably, in the present time, of course, I think would have been prosecuted for wasting police time. Certainly, had he interfered in one of my investigations, I would have delighted in locking him up in one of my little grey cells.
But as a detective, then, what do you think of his powers of detection?
Well, they are very simplistic, and one has to say that as a technician in the trade, you have to be aware of all sorts of things which Poirot is not aware of. Certainly, he has no consciousness of the continuity of evidence, for example, which is a very necessary ingredient in getting a case to court. He also obtains statements which are never written down, it would appear, and I suspect that were they to go to court, defence counsel would have the greatest of delight in having them disallowed and probably accusing him of having obtained them under duress. As for the denouement, where half a dozen suspects are gathered together in order that one may be pointed out as the villain of the piece, in reality you would have to arrest all of them, otherwise they wouldn't be there. And given that there was only one that you were going to charge with murder at the end of it, the other five would undoubtedly proceed against you in the civil court for wrongful arrest.
Thank you very much. Now, in Agatha's books, when someone is murdered, they cease to be a human being or of any interest the moment they hit the deck. As Anthony Clare said, she has no taste for blood and guts. Dr. Stephen Leadbeater, a Home Office pathologist, deals with cadavers on a daily basis and now takes a detached, professional look at death, Christie style.
Before I begin, let me introduce my counterpart in Murder on the Orient Express.
Pupil still slightly dilated. Could have been drugged. Was drugged.
With what?
There's a smell of valerian, which is harmless, but something must have been added. May I close his eyes now?
Wish you would.
Why did he lose so much blood? Can I pull back the bedclothes?
By all means.
Mr. Ratchet has been frontally stabbed 10, 11, 12 times.
They don't make forensic pathologists like that anymore. He can tell the precise nature of the wounds in the body, can distinguish between a stab or a slash wound without removing the clothes. Later in the scene, he can give a very narrow range for the time of death, apparently by merely closing the eyelids of the body. Of course, none of these things is possible in real life. But let me put my cards on the table. These are faults of adaptation, not of Mrs. Christie's. None of that scene occurs as such in the novel. Writers of the puzzle detective story do have problems with medical evidence. It's necessary for certain plot scenarios to have doctors make statements which, if they made them in real life, would be at the very least unwise. Mrs. Christie handled these problems with her customary dexterity, and in fact, only rarely is she caught out in an overt error of fact. The methods of murder in Mrs. Christie's books range from the common or garden stabbing, bludgeoning, strangling, shooting, to the more exotic and perhaps more improbable. There is not, to my knowledge, a flourishing black market trade in blowpipe darts tipped with the venom of the boomslang, infected shaving brushes, or exploding chess pieces. But this, of course, may only reflect the narrowness of my experience. Writers of the puzzle detective story place touching faith in the statement, death must have been instantaneous. In fact, it might be difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that even the proverbial headless chicken was incapable of crossing a road. In Appointment with Death, the murderer injects digitoxin from a hypodermic syringe into a vein in the wrist. Now, it's difficult enough for a trained medical practitioner to find a vein in the wrist of a person of my meager dimensions, let alone in that of the obese and bloated victim, as it should have been in the book. And it would at least require the murderer to look at that wrist. And of course, as we saw, death was instantaneous. On the other hand, or wrist, in 1-2 Buckle My Shoe, the murder method, injection of procaine and adrenaline into the gum, would in fact be likely to cause near instantaneous collapse and death. Unfortunately, the victim is not only able to make his way out of the dentist's chair in which the injection takes place, but can call a taxi for the Savoy, where he dies some 5 hours later. The precise time of death is a major problem for writers of detective stories. If the plot turns on an unbreakable alibi, it's little use for the writer to have his fictional pathologist, as would have to happen in real life, give a range of possible times of death which would enable an away-day murderer and several super-saver suspects to get from Penzance to Durham, changing at both Paddington and Manchester. But let's put things in perspective. If, as has been reported, at least one real life has been saved because someone recognized a case of thallium poisoning from the accurate description of its symptoms given by Mrs. Christie in The Pale Horse, then all previous criticisms fade into the insignificance of carping pedantry. Because what does it matter that there are improbabilities and occasional errors of medical fact in detective stories? They push the story along, they allow the construction of elaborate plot gambits and scenarios, they may be used to draw